Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. How much should you be saving? This is one of the biggest questions in personal finance. And if it had one simple answer like save 10% of your income or 15% of your income, we wouldn't need to have this conversation. But the reality is that how much you need to save depends so much on your timeline, your income, and your personal goals, and more factors than you can imagine. So in this video, we're breaking it all down, and my goal is that by the end, you'll know exactly how much you need to save based on your personal situation. So whether you're in your 20s just starting out or you're in your 50s and feeling a little bit behind, this video is a one-stop guide. Let's start with the single most important piece of this puzzle: when you want to retire. The earlier you want to retire, the more years your savings needs to cover, especially if you're retiring before Social Security kicks in. In that kind of situation, you would be relying 100% on income from your investments. On the other hand, if you're not planning to retire until later, this gives your investments more time to grow. It puts less pressure on you to save a large chunk of your income. Even delaying your retirement by a few years can make a huge difference. So whether you're planning on retiring in 40 years, in 30 years, in 20 years, or 10 years, your timeline changes everything. Now let's talk about what you'll actually spend in retirement. Because retirement planning isn't about replacing your income, it's about replacing your spending. Often a general rule of thumb that we tend to hear is you'll want to replace 80% of your pre-retirement income, or you'll hear something like 90%, or you'll hear a lot of financial planners build it around 100% replacement. And it really depends. It depends how much of your income you're spending. If you're saving aggressively, you can plan on replacing a smaller portion because you only need to replace what you're actually spending. If you spend your entire paycheck, well, then you're probably going to need to find a way to replace your entire paycheck. For this video, I'm going to use 80%, 90%, and 100% as replacement rates, but these are only being used as a reference point. The best thing that you can do is build a personalized retirement budget, figure out exactly what your number is, and it might give you more flexibility than you think. So how much do you need to save based on when you want to retire? So let's combine those first two ideas, your target retirement age, as well as your spending goals, to figure out how much you would need to save in order to retire comfortably. Here, we're going to have to make a few assumptions. We're going to assume that you're starting from having $0 invested. We'll assume a 7% rate of return in the market, and we'll also assume a 4% rate of withdrawal in retirement. And we'll assume a consistent percentage saved of your income every single year. And bonus, remember, if you have an employer who has an employer matching contribution to a retirement account, that reduces how much you need to save on a percent for percent basis. That's free money. Make sure you capture it. If you want to retire in 40 years and spend 100% of your pre-retirement income, you would need to invest 10 to 12% of your income on an annual basis. If you're starting from zero and only have 10 years to get to this target, you would need to save 45 to 50% of your income. And please keep in mind, if you're approaching this from the stance that you want to replace 100% of your income, that means with an aggressive savings rate, you would be actually allowing yourself to get a pay increase in retirement because you would no longer be saving a portion of your income. On the other hand, if you're only planning on spending 80% of your pre-retirement income, if you have 40 years until retirement, you might only need to save 8 to 10% of your income. However, if you only have 10 years, you would need to save anywhere from 35 to 40% of your income. The key takeaway is the shorter your time horizon, the higher your savings rate needs to be. The earlier you start, the lesser percentage of your income you can get away with saving and investing for the future. And remember, small changes can make a big difference along the way. Next up is your withdrawal rate, and this single number can completely change how much you need to save. You'll tend to hear a lot of opinions on this. The gold standard that you tend to hear about is a 4% rate of withdrawal. Others argue that a 3% rate of withdrawal is the safer number to go with. Or if you're more comfortable with a little more aggressive withdrawal rate, some argue for a 5%. So what's the right number? Well, it depends. It depends on how long you expect your retirement to last. It depends on how your money's invested, and it really depends on how much risk you're comfortable with. To keep it simple, let's say you want to spend $50,000 a year from your investments, and let's go over how much you would need invested based on the withdrawal rate you're comfortable using. So if you want to use a 3% withdrawal rate, you'd need about $1.7 million invested. If you had a $50,000 income prior to retirement, that would be about 33 times your income in investments. If you want to use a 4% rate of withdrawal, you would need about $1.25 million invested, or about 25 times your income if you had a pre-retirement income of $50,000. And if you're willing to use a 5% rate of withdrawal, which is a more aggressive rate of withdrawal, you would need a lesser portfolio of about $1 million. So yes, this one number absolutely changes everything. Now let's talk about income that doesn't come from your investments. Social Security, pensions, annuities, rental income, all of these income sources reduce how much you would need to withdraw from your investments. And this offset is dollar for dollar, which is huge when you remember that your savings is based on a multiple of your spending. So let's break it down with a few examples. So let's say you spend $5,000 a month. And let's say you're a single income earning household and get a $2,000 monthly check from Social Security. That leaves a $3,000 monthly gap. Over the course of the year, you need to fill $36,000 from your investments. If you're willing to use a 5% withdrawal rate, that would mean you would need $720,000 invested. Compare that to someone who needs to cover the full $5,000 a month from investments. That would be $60,000 a year, and with the same 5% withdrawal rate, that would mean you would need a $1.2 million investment portfolio. In this situation, one Social Security check cut your savings need by nearly $500,000. Now let's do an example of a dual income earning household. Let's say the household spending is still $5,000 a month, but this time we're going to assume that each individual has their own $2,000 monthly benefit check from Social Security, bringing in $4,000 a month in guaranteed income. In this situation, we only have a spending gap of $1,000 that needs to be filled from investments. Over the course of the year, we would need to pull $12,000 from investments. If you're willing to use a 5% withdrawal rate, that would mean you would need about $240,000 invested. This really illustrates the power of having guaranteed income streams. So before you calculate how much you need to save, find out what your spending is, subtract your guaranteed income streams, and that's the gap you need to fill. The smaller this gap, the smaller amount you truly need in investments. Here's the question no one can answer for you. How long will you live? Maybe 85, maybe 95, maybe 100. Ultimately, you can look at family history, you can look at your lifestyle, you can look at your overall health, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a guess. And that guess truly matters, because what happens if your retirement goes for 10 additional years than you planned for? With a longer retirement, you want to use a lower withdrawal rate. Instead of using a 4% rate of withdrawal, maybe you get a little bit more conservative. Maybe you use something like 3.3%, 3.5%. This can help protect you from market dips, inflation, and longevity. But remember, using a lower withdrawal rate means you have a higher savings target. If you use a 4% rate of withdrawal, you would need 25 times your annual spending need. But if you're using a 3.3% rate of withdrawal, you would need about 30 times your annual spending need. Let's say you want to spend $50,000 a year in retirement. With a 4% rate of withdrawal, that is $1.25 million invested. Using a 3.3% withdrawal rate, that's $1.52 million that you would need invested. That's nearly a $300,000 difference. And keep in mind that asset allocation matters more. A longer retirement means your portfolio needs to continue growing and lasting longer. So this really speaks to the importance to maintaining stock exposure throughout your retirement so your portfolio continues to grow. The bottom line is, if you think you might live longer than you expect, you want to make sure your money does as well. Inflation is quiet but powerful. 3% inflation on an annual basis might not sound like much, but over time, it compounds. Let's assume that you want to spend $60,000 a year in retirement. In 10 years' time, with a 3% annualized inflation, you would need $80,000 just to maintain your lifestyle. In 20 years' time, your spending would be around $100,000 for the same lifestyle. And in 30 years' time, that spending might be closer to $145,000 a year. Remember, you're not just planning for year one of retirement, you're planning for the next few decades. So how can you protect against inflation? Number one, invest for growth. I know cash can feel safe, but if your returns aren't outpacing inflation, you're losing purchasing power. And two, build in raises. Don't assume that retirement spending stays flat. You want to make sure that you have the ability to increase your spending to keep pace with inflation. Maybe that increases by 1 or 2% per year. It really comes down to your true spending, but just know that certain categories will increase over time. Maybe it's housing, maybe it's food, maybe it's healthcare. And keep in mind, safe rates of withdrawal have this built in. A 4% withdrawal rate means you withdraw 4% in year one, then increase that amount each year for inflation. If you start at $40,000 and inflation is 3%, you'd take $41,200 in year two, and so on. This is why safe withdrawal rates start conservatively. They have to last for the long haul. Healthcare is one of the most unpredictable and rising costs in retirement. If you retire before 65, you might have to foot the bill for your health insurance entirely, and this could be thousands or hundreds per month. If you retire at 65 or later, Medicare absolutely helps, but it doesn't cover everything. It doesn't cover dental, vision, hearing, long-term care, and there are absolutely copays that you need to take care of. Some people like to have their own healthcare bucket to cover expenses, or an HSA that they've allowed to grow over time. I do have a full video dedicated to what might be the realistic healthcare costs you could expect in retirement. I'll link it above and down below if you're interested in checking it out. But at the end of the day, don't treat healthcare expenses in retirement as an afterthought. They are one of those expenses that will increase over the course of your life. And finally, let's talk about the people who rely on you or who you want to leave something to. Maybe you're supporting adult children, helping grandkids, or caring for aging parents. Or maybe you just want to leave money to a cause, your community, or future generations. These goals do two things. They increase your spending needs, and they extend your planning timeline. If your plan includes others, financially and emotionally, you're likely going to need to save much more than someone who's simply planning to fund their own life. This is not right or wrong, it's about knowing what your goals are and planning accordingly. So let's wrap it up. How much should I save? Well, there is no one-size-fits-all answer, but now you know the 9 factors to consider to answer that question for yourself. Retirement age, annual spending, withdrawal rate, any other income sources, longevity, inflation, healthcare, dependents, and legacy goals. The earlier you start, the less you need to save, and truly, the more flexibility you really have built into your plan. And the more intentional you are with your plan, the more peace of mind you're going to have as you go into retirement. So whether your ultimate number is $500,000 or $5 million, it's not about comparing to anyone else. It's making sure that you have enough to live the life of your dreams and meet your goals. So what are your thoughts? Share them in a comment down below. Do you have a perfect ideal savings rate? I'd love to hear it. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. And that also means importance of flexibility you really have with your plan. I don't know where I want to go. Lesser rate of savings, whoa, no.